I think these kinds of TV shows speak to a very particular era of children's television that all came after Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. I feel like he was very influential in the sort of like genre of, oh, you're going to come over and we're going to hang out at my house type thing.
Yeah.
That definitely feels like this is within the same vein as that.
Yeah, definitely. Besides that, the intro, you never forget it once you like listen to it once, yeah?
Yeah, big time. In fact, like when I first thought of the show, the first thing I thought of again was the music, both the intro and the outro.
Hello everyone, welcome to an episode of The Box Cutter, where we take apart an episode of Disney's Out of the Box and see if it still holds up. My name is Daniel, and my co-host for today is a good friend of mine. We used to go to high school together, competed in academic decathlon. She's a great vocalist, musician, and a degree in literature from UC San Diego. Hey Natalie, how are you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing all right. How are you doing?
I'm good. What are you doing these days since our high school misadventures?
Well, I just took a year off of doing basically much of anything after I got my degree. I did do an internship with a children's entertainment provider called Lucky Uncle Productions. I was their social media intern, and I was in charge of talking about their book catalog. So it's really interesting seeing, like, going to a very different side of the children's entertainment industry with this. I am actually going into substitute teaching after this. I'm going through the application process right now, but I do have my credential. So children's entertainment, education, is all up my alley.
That's great.
Ideally, I would like to teach more middle school or high school because I think that my expertise in the content would make me a really good resource. But I just like kids, so I'm in for all of it.
I see. So, the episode we're talking about today is called Box Full of Boxes. I'm going to be saying box a lot in this episode. I'll just say that much.
Yeah, I'm actually really glad that we picked this one. I was looking at the list of episodes, and I mean, because I watched the show when I was a really little kid, I didn't specifically remember any episodes, so I picked based off of title alone. I thought this one sounded really meta, and it totally is.
I mean, there's one specific episode I remember. It's from season 2, where they celebrate everyone's birthday all at once, and I remember it. I distinctly remember it because they played musical chairs and they made a birthday cake out of cardboard. And I don't know why I remember it. It's just one that I specifically remember. So let's go ahead and dive into it then, yes?
Yes.
Alright, so we start with Vivian in the clubhouse, and she is messing around with some paper clips. And she shows us that she is making a bracelet. Noting that if she had more...
She could have made a necklace.
Yes, she could have made a necklace. And so she looks at the tiny box that they came in.
I kind of figured that the box was left over from something else. When I think of little boxes like that, they kind of remind me of this is actually funny because this is a box in a box situation. When you order a piece of jewelry a lot of the time, like a necklace or a ring or something, it'll come in a very nice box. But a lot of the time, that box will come in another box to protect the pretty box.
Oh,
so
I know.
I think that's what that box that she had was. It looked like a leftover jewelry box. And the comment that she made, this box is so cute though, I love that. Because first of all, that's me big time. I think some boxes are just adorable. And I think that's a really interesting human quirk that we want to anthropomorphize boxes. And because this show, Out of the Box, takes place in a clubhouse made of boxes, I think that's really demonstrating the way that, you anthropomorphize certain things, and it creates the clubhouse as a sort of character too. It's not just Tony and Vivian and the kids. The clubhouse is also a character.
Well, that's true. They even, they deem it the box. Yeah, so she looks at it and she says it's so cute, and she gets ideas of maybe decorating it and giving it as a gift box or making it a jewelry box for her new bracelet. which is exactly what you said, a jewelry box. And so Alicia, Dane, and Nicholas come in with Tony right behind them, and Alicia sees Vivian's bracelet asking about it. So Vivian tells her that she made it out of paper clips, and Alicia asks if Vivian can make one for her too. Unfortunately, Vivian has to say she ran out. Even though Viv says that she can't have it, Alicia doesn't seem too bothered. And then she just moves on and sees the tiny little box, and she asks Vivian what she plans to do with it. And Vivian said that she doesn't really have any plans for it, so she's nice enough to at least give that to Alicia and see what she can do with it. So they look at the box and they think, oh, it's so cute, it's so teeny and tiny. And seeing how Vivian is talking about boxes, Tony kind of like takes her lead and brings out this large box. And everyone else compares how teeny that little purple jewelry box is compared to the big box. And then Vivian looks at it again and realizes that that box is where they put away all the leftover boxes when they built the clubhouse. So it's kind of interesting that they're calling back to the day that they built the clubhouse. So Tony gets this big box, and then he opens it, and then he lifts out another box. And in that box, he dumps out all the other boxes that are different shapes and sizes. And that reminds me of, remember, have you ever seen The Emperor's New Groove?
Yes.
Where...
I know what you're going to talk about right now.
Yes, where Yzma's trying to figure out how to kill Emperor Cusco. And she's like, I'll turn him into a flea. And then I'll put that flea in a box. And then I'll put that box inside of another box. And then I'll ship it to myself. And then smash it with a hammer.
Or, to save on postage, just poison him. Yeah, classic. That whole idea of, like, a box inside a box, I think that's one of the really classic sort of loops that people think about, where you keep on opening something over and over again. So I think people come back to this image of a box as one of the things that can create an endless cycle.
Mm-hmm. Kids being kids, they rush over to the big old mess and pile of boxes looking through them. Alicia finds in the pile a box made out of wood. It looked really pretty. And Nicholas finds a hat box that reminds him of a drum. It's just an interesting role reversal of how wooden boxes were a rare find a few years back, not so common, and now hat boxes are harder to find out in the wild, I guess you could say.
I think it's funny that you mention that the box that's used as a drum is a hat box, because one of the kids also uses a box as a hat, and it's not a hat box.
Yeah. I think it's
a lot of irony in this episode.
Yes, there's a lot of irony in this episode. So, yeah, so Nicholas finds a hat box and it reminds him of a drum, so Tony tests it out, and then he has Nicholas test it out, and so with everyone else seeing Tony and Nicholas drumming, they decide to play along with their boxes.
It's music time!
The first song is called Box Beat, and it gives off that kind of like late 80s, early 90s kind of hip-hop tune. And it's a really good song that instills how accessible music making can be, calling back to just household items that can be used to make music. Well, what are your thoughts on it?
I think, depending on the kind of music you do, that being a musician can be really expensive. For example, the saxophone that I have is like an intermediate saxophone, and it's a Selmer. But normally, saxophones kind of in that price range. They're like $3,000 if you want like a decent intermediate instrument. And that's kind of across the board for lots of instruments like that. Like I know that's specifically for saxes, but then also various kinds of horns. It really depends. Sometimes if the bigger the instrument it gets, like obviously the more expensive it's going to be, or even just the more intricate it gets. Like a French horn is really expensive too. But I like this idea of accessible music because it really kind of broadens our sense of where music comes from and takes us away from the sort of like classic instruments that we see everywhere else, and reminds us that we can make instrument out of basically anything we want. Actually, Ringo Starr got his start in percussion when he was in the hospital because he was a really sickly child. So he wasn't in school a lot, and when he was in the hospital, he like made an impromptu drum kit out of various like coffee tins and pans and things like that. And that's where he got his start in percussion. And now he's one of the most famous drummers of all time.
Mm-hmm. That's true. So once they've had their fun drumming on their boxes, Dane gets the idea of making his box into a hat, which gives Nicholas the idea of putting his feet in some shoe boxes to make into a pair of skates. And that, in turn, gives Alicia the idea of pretending her wooden box is a phone, and then she sees the large box as a house. I thought that was just an interesting scene just because it was like just a explosion of ideas. And that's
Yes.
true. Sometimes you just get all these ideas just from just letting your mind wander. So everyone plays along, noting how lovely her house is. But then Alicia gets the idea of making a gingerbread house. She calls it a candy house. I've never heard anyone call it a candy house. I've always heard gingerbread house. But instead of using candy, using the leftover boxes.
It's arts and crafts time.
Yeah, I love the layers of imagination that happen in this scene because we have the children using craft materials to simulate candy, simulating housing structures. So we get cotton as cotton candy as windows, and we get foam as taffy as a doorbell. So there are multiple layers of imagining that are happening here.
Exactly. And I didn't know how to phrase it, what they were making. I just put cardboard props. So they make a candy house. So they get tape and they stick on pot scrubber, the plastic things all over. And then they get sponges, colorful sponges, and stick them all over. And packing peanuts. Even though packing peanuts, I don't think everyone is going to have packing peanuts in their house. And they use pipe cleaners to make candy canes. They didn't really say, oh, well, why don't we grab some tape and then we'll grab a few sponges. And they just went for it without saying anything. And most of the time they'll just explain what they're doing before they start diving into it. So I wish they kind of explained what they were doing a bit more for the
Right. It doesn't necessarily seem like it could be replicable for another kid if they don't know what materials they're really looking at, especially if they're wanting their parents to go get those materials and they don't know what to call them, foam, or what kid knows what a packing peanut is, unless they're told what it is.
Speaking of which, they also make a box hat. So Dane just grabs his hat and he puts stickers on it and then he tapes on these clear blocks. I was like, what is he taping on the top of it? Because it was you didn't really get a clear idea of what it was. And then I was lucky enough to catch a frame, just these clear building blocks. And then we see Nicholas actually make the easiest thing. He makes a box cake. So he grabs different sized boxes and layers one on top of the other on top of the other. And then he tapes them all. And then he gets cardboard tubes, paper towel roll or a toilet paper roll, and he sticks them onto the cake. And that, I think, was the easiest and most successful. I feel, though, that they could have put, construction paper as frosting or colored it, and then, scrunched up some, orange construction paper and put it inside the tube as, a candle flame.
Right,
So,
yeah. Later they talk about how delicious the candy house looks, but then I don't get the same energy at all from the box cake. The box cake literally just looks like it's made of cardboard. And so that idea of sort of letting your imagination run wild, I don't think it necessarily ever landed with the cake.
Yeah, the cardboard cake just seems like an afterthought. They revisit it again in, like I said, season 2's episode where they talk about birthdays. They revisit that.
They're making up for their past failures.
Probably. So Tony and Vivian see how everyone made a box house, a box hat, and even a box cake, which inspires him to sing a song about what else can be made with boxes.
It's music time.
So the song is called All You Need Is a Box. And the song talks about all the possible things you can make or do with just a box. Like you can put some on your feet and you can slide around and skate, or you can get one that's big enough to drum on or make a hat out of it. And it had like this very classic rock and roll type of vibe because it uses like piano but also the beat. But I just felt like it was just a bit too slow. It kind of like brought the energy to a crawl.
I see what you mean about the tone, but I was more focused on the actual content of the lyrics itself. A lyric that really stuck out to me in this number was, "A box can be anything for you." And I felt like that really hit the core of not just this episode, but also the show. There's this sort of philosophy of imagination that happens in this show all the time, where they're constantly doing crafts, they're making things, they're telling stories. So it's this kind of idea of letting your imagination run wild, and they do that with a really simple image. And I think that's the strength of this song, and that's why it really stuck out to me.
I kind of have to contest it just because I feel like Box Beat kind of has that message of you can make music with anything in your house versus all you need is a box. It basically just glorifies a box, and I get this whole episode is about boxes, but I feel like Box Beat just gives more attention to like the whole idea of making music with boxes and other things in your house.
I think the reason I like it so much is that the best way to highlight the possibilities of something is to be as broad as possible. But I can see why when you're specifically talking to kids, especially kids who are really particular, like they would want it to be specific. They would want to know what you can do with a box.
So the kids imagine, like you said, how delicious their house would be if it was made of real candy. And that has Vivian asking if it reminds them of that witch's house from Hansel and Gretel. And Dane poses this question of, why don't we act out the story, but instead of it being a mean witch, what if it was a nice wizard?
It's story time.
This story was strange for me.
This story of Hansel and Gretel, look, let me preface this by saying, I really don't care for the story of Hansel and Gretel. I've heard it too many times to just be so callous. It's one of my, least favorite. It doesn't mean I hate the story, it just means that I'd rather hear other stories before Hansel and Gretel. It is a little strange, but
I think the meaning in this, because it's a morality tale. All fables and fairy tales are basically morality tales. These kids literally end up listening to a stranger who gives them candy in the woods. It just doesn't feel right. It's just like, oh, if someone's nice and gives you candy, then you can trust them. And I just don't feel like that's the right message to send at all.
A lot of the time they abridge or they modernize classic tales. It went about it a very incorrect way. I get that they're not trying to make it this scary tale of this witch who kidnaps these children and is going to eat them because this is like a preschooler show. However, there still could have been some sort of element of tension because we get Hansel and Gretel, which is Nicholas and Alicia, and they wander off to chase their ball in the woods, and then they come across this candy house that a wizard, played by Dane, lives in. And so they start eating it, and so then the wizard goes outside to see these two children eating it, and rather than get upset and be like, no, because I'd be upset if people were messing up my house. I don't care.
You're totally right. I missed the part of this where these kids are destroying this wizard's property, and he's just like, oh, I'm fine with it.
Exactly. It's like he's not.
It's sending layers of really bad messages to children.
It's just I wish they could have been I could help you, but you never asked if you could have some of my candy house. Help me fix it, and then I'll help you find your way back.
Right. And in a similar vein, I'm fine with the wizard being a nice character and like a helpful stranger as opposed to someone who's, mean or malicious. But I think in the end they could have like addressed it or something where their father like chides them or something for not just running off, but also for, talking to a stranger.
Yeah.
There are holes in this narrative that I feel didn't get plugged.
Yeah.
I feel like this is the womp womp part of this episode. I think this is where the episode really failed.
The 90s were a little too trusting of a time with
Right.
regard.
I think it's like kind of the turning point too, because this is also the era where we start to see, I think they call them milk carton kids, where suddenly people are actually not just actually concerned about what's happening to children, but sort of like creating infrastructure to make sure that children don't get kidnapped.
And I understand that people have these, like, are very quick to jump the gun of being cautious because of all these tragedies and instances that happen.
Yeah, I think something that I was missing from the show is kind of the context that you were craving. You were talking about missing a pilot episode where they first make the box. And I feel like there's like very little established about how Tony and Vivian met the kids in their neighborhood. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily cringy, but I don't know, just kind of like, but how?
I've kind of come up with like this idea of maybe Tony and Vivian, because they're so like gifted in arts and music, maybe what it is that they live within a neighborhood and maybe like they're teachers, and maybe in the summertime they just have like a day camp type of setup, and so they just watch the kids.
Daddy daycare scenario.
Yeah, like they just watch the kids during summertime, but they're like teachers when it's not summer. That's how I kind of feel about it, because it's like it would kind of make sense as to why some kids stick around for more seasons and other kids just like come and go, because maybe
maybe they move or something.
Yeah, maybe they move. Maybe they're just too old. Cause like the oldest some of them are when they first filmed it was like 9 years old, and the youngest was like 6 years old. I totally lost my point that I originally made, but
yeah, we really went off on a tangent there. But it was
fine.
Good. It was good. We unpacked a lot.
It is. But yeah, it's just like, we live in a sad time where we're way too cautious, and we never have figures like Mr. Rogers, Tony, Vivian anymore. We talked about this more than we talked about the story. But yeah, it's just, it was just, the story just needed a few more things to feel like a complete story that felt like it had a satisfying ending. I don't know, there's just so many questions of why would their dad take him to go chop wood if he wasn't really chopping wood and getting a cake? Why?
They didn't even mention the end of the story, which is just as bizarre as the rest of it.
Yeah, so
the whole part where it ends with a birthday, and also the two kids are twins. It felt like it got added in just kind of because, for no good reason.
I don't know. I always thought that Hansel and Gretel were twins. Weren't they?
I don't know, and I never operated on that assumption. But it was just kind of strange. Like, why add in that information at the end?
I would have thought it would have been funny if Dane would have been like, but you guys don't look the same. And then, like, I don't know, one of them said, it's the 90s.
I just get really meta again. Yeah, I don't know. It's just kind of, it felt like extra information. It made it even harder to take away a moral from the story. Like, the moral that I was kind of getting was, like, listen to your parents, but also there were no consequences whatsoever. In fact, they were rewarded for presumably bad behavior at the end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it just kind of seemed like random and conflated whatever message was already there. It was confusing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, once they finish the story, Tony and the kids talk about the flaws of having a candy house. So now they draw back to the candy house and just like all the flaw that would come of it, like just having to brush your teeth all the time, and then just how sticky it'd get on a hot summer day. Right. And with all the talk of houses, Tony lets them know that it's time to head back to their houses. Before they leave, though, Alicia remembers to grab the tiny box that Vivian gave her. And she comes up with the idea of making a house for her tiny doll. Tony then takes the kids home, and Vivian takes the time to explain how boxes are just the best, coming in all kinds of shapes and sizes, and all the fun you can have with one. And so that was Box Full of Boxes. So let's go ahead and talk about our notes for each of the actors. I'll give you a name, and then you just give me your opinion on their acting. So let's go ahead and start with Tony then.
Tony is always a 10 out of 10 for me. He's probably my favorite on the show. And then he's also such a crucial element in that he leads all of the musical opportunities on the show, which is like one of the most crucial parts of it. So Tony is a 10.
In this episode, I felt he played a good support role to everyone. He wasn't necessarily the lead, because there are episodes where he does lead, but in this episode, he just felt like he was helping everybody else and was okay with just being in their corner rather than being in the limelight.
Yeah, I see that.
Alright then, what about Vivian?
Vivian, I think this episode definitely had more of a focus on her, in that especially since she gets that beginning moment with her and the paper clips. I've always really liked Viv because she has a really gentle energy, and I think she's also very clear when she speaks, which is a real plus for children. She's very she's very grounding. So I think a solid 9. She doesn't have that musical element as much as Tony, but she's always just excellent as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, she's a classically trained singer. She, in this episode, was just very energized and very engaged, getting down to build the house with the kids and just, like, asking and inquiring about what they're doing and what they have. And because, like, when they're making the house, she asks about what Dane's doing with the pipe cleaners. And so he's like, oh, I'm twisting them. And then you bend them, and then you have a candy cane. Alright then, so let's talk about first one, Alicia.
Alicia is my favorite. I don't know, she's adorable, and I think because she was sort of the focal figure in this episode, I really enjoyed her. I feel everyone was sort of inspired by the directions that she went with imagination, and everyone, when they referred to the candy house that is so focal in this episode, they referred to it as her candy house, and all of the other little kids were or the other two were asking her oh, can I do this to your house? Can I do this to your house? And it felt really organic, like she was actually making that house. So I think she did a really solid job here.
Yeah.
Alicia was my favorite of the 3.
Yeah. So for me, Alicia is very nice, but she has a very sassy energy.
I love that.
And she's just very sweet, because when they're making the candy house, she could have been like, no, I don't want that. Or, no, you can't do that. Like, she could have easily just said no to them. And then, that would have been very organic. And then Vivian or Tony could have stepped in and be like, well, Nicholas is just trying to help, or Dane's just trying to make it look a lot prettier. I felt like it could have been a little more organic.
Right. I don't know. I guess there's also that question of, how much of a script these actors really work with. Because some of the things that the actors are doing, they seem like they could feasibly be going their own direction.
They're pretty good actors. Right.
But I also don't know how much of it really is scripted. So yeah. I'm not sure I can really make a call on that. But I don't know. I did appreciate that her nice balance of being kind of sassy and sweet.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, calling back to that, there are times though when the kids kind of have a disagreement. There was one there where they were a crab and octopus and a fisherman, and then Dane and some other girl were arguing about who was going to play the octopus. And then Vivian steps in and is just like, oh, well, you can both play the octopus because an octopus has 8 arms. And such. So there are those times. Cute. There are those times where they have disagreements, but it's never. You can never tell when it's organic or when it's scripted, because it's they're just it's like the way they talk. It just definitely how kids talk. All right, then. So what about Nicholas?
I like Nicholas. He kind of felt like, no, I don't want to say the odd one out because it really worked. But he brought an interesting vibe to the rest of the episode. He did make, I think he's the one that made that really ugly birthday cake, right?
Yeah, it wasn't
I don't know.
ugly. It was just undressed.
Yeah, and then he also did like the gingerbread man.
Yeah, he made the outline of the gingerbread using a cookie cutter.
I think the thing I enjoyed about him is that his crafts sort of flopped, but it made me feel good because when I was a kid, like so many of my crafts like ended up looking unfinished.
He's good. I just never really have much to say about him that I haven't already said. I guess he's very spontaneous. Because, like, when they're asking about the cake that he made, he's all like, they're asking him, well, is it your birthday? He's like, no. But it will be soon. Like, he's just very spontaneous and very wide-eyed and optimistic. And again, I always go back to saying he's very wide-eyed because it's, like, true. Versus, like, in the later seasons, he refines his acting a little because he gets older. And lastly, there is Dane.
Dane made no impression on me whatsoever. I don't have anything to say about Dane. I guess he must have been pretty boring. I mean, like, what I guess the primary moment where he gets kind of a spotlight is maybe when he's making the candy cane. I don't know, but like he just didn't stick out to me in any way whatsoever. Maybe that means that he was really natural, or that he just didn't have many lines. Period. But I felt like he had the opportunity to really be there, and I just didn't get anything from it whatsoever.
For me, Dane, he has a great smile. But I can tell he puts a lot of effort into exuding energy. He just doesn't seem like the type of kid to really be in your face. He's just genuinely a nice kid. But it's like, yeah, I just feel like he really has to put a lot of effort into being at the same energy level of Alicia and Nicholas, in my opinion. Cause I was really shy as a kid, and like, even though I was shy, a lot of the time people would just like give me attention, and I wouldn't even know why. And it's apparently it's because I just gave off just like a lot of energy, even though I was like super shy. Unfortunately for him, he's just not the type of kid to exude a lot of energy, and that's not to say he's boring. It just means that, he's just calm and he's just a nice kid. So, alright, then let's go ahead and give our verdict then. So, what is your verdict on the theme, the idea of boxes? Do you think that is something that still piques the interest of kids today?
I don't know why it wouldn't. I mean, there's just something about a box. This might be coming from personal bias because I do love boxes, but also it's, I don't know, it's just like that one song said, that a box is a possibility. There's a lot that you can do with it. And I think this idea of building is really central to children, and they get a lot of that with like maybe Lego and stuff like that. But beyond that, when you want to go bigger, like you use cardboard. It's the classic. It just doesn't die. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Maybe kids do this with Minecraft now. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. I'd still say that it's a theme or a topic that still holds interest. Just because, just looking at just a simple item as a box, you can do so much of it. And just this episode kind of like gives inspiration to children of all the different crazy things that they can do with just a box. So I feel that the theme of boxes still holds up. What about you?
Yeah, I agree. I think it holds up. And also because it's just so central and, I don't know, evocative of the whole show itself.
Okay.
I mean, the entire principle is what life is like inside the box. So boxes within boxes, a box full of boxes, is just ideal. It really hits.
All right. So what are your thoughts on the music?
I think the music is maybe the most crucial part of the show, not just because of the structure of it, but because it's one of the most memorable parts.
I'd say for this episode, the music is kind of like 50-50. I'd say 50 in the case of Box Beat, in that Box Beat is very, like, engaging, and having kids, if they have a box, they can drum along, or even if they don't have a box, they can use the floor or their lap. So I'd say that Box Beat is still, like, it's still pretty good. It makes me, like, bop my head around. But I'd say the other song, All You Need Is a Box, is just, it's too slow.
See, and I kind of like the balance of it, where Box Beat is more upbeat, and then All You Need Is a Box is maybe a little bit more grounding, especially since the message is a little bit more broad. So I don't know, I kind of like the way that the two even each other out. But also, I just have a penchant for the music in this show.
So, in my opinion, though, I feel like the music still holds up in terms of, like, the lyrics. If they updated the instrumentals, definitely would be even better.
Yeah, I would agree. I think especially the message, because like the theme of this particular episode was so good that it was hard for the music to really ever go wrong.
So, the arts and crafts, for me, just flat out, the arts and crafts for this segment just doesn't hold up because there's just not really any direction for it.
I think visually it was really fun to look at, especially to see the candy house come together.
Mm-hmm.
But then I felt like there wasn't a lot of structure or organization happening, where everyone was working on really different projects at the same time, which certainly speaks to one of the themes, that you can do anything with a box, so why not do all of the things? But it also just made it really hard to follow. So yeah, I totally see what you're saying. I think maybe the crafts missed this episode, because it's just, you don't necessarily know what's going on.
The story, again, with the story, I feel like it just had too many. Yes, it doesn't hold up because it just instills these concepts, and I get where they're coming from. They had good intentions. They have, like, educational consultants,
and they wanted to make it appropriate too. They didn't want to scare kids, but then it ended up just sending a really weird message.
Yeah, it just had these really weird things of, like, just because you see something that looks, great out in the middle of nowhere doesn't mean that you should just run to it right away. Just because someone offers to give you something doesn't mean that you should trust them.
Right, yeah. The message just got really confusing. I think it had really good intentions, which is kind of that original Hansel and Gretel moral, to listen to your parents. But changing the story like they did and adding in confusing elements at the end, I think it just clouded everything entirely. So this is a no from me. Does not hold up whatsoever.
Mm-hmm. And lastly, the overall performance of everyone in this episode.
I think as an ensemble, they all work really great together, especially Tony and Viv. But I don't know, sometimes the kids are just awkward because kids are awkward on stage.
Yeah. For me, this was, it was an okay episode. There was nothing inherently wrong with their acting, but there wasn't inherently anything very outstanding about their acting either.
Right, it's not spectacular, but it's all right.
Mm-hmm. So overall, Box Full of Boxes barely, but still holds up. So, Natalie, I appreciate you coming on. I hope to have you on again. Is there anything that you would like last minute thoughts, or any upcoming things, or anything you'd like to plug?
I enjoy children's entertainment from a very different perspective now. I mean, I'm going to be going into substitute teaching. Check out my Medium page, Natalie Leidick, my name, Lydlck.
All right. So make sure to leave a comment if you like what you hear. Why not subscribe? I have a YouTube page, The Box Cutter, as well as a SoundCloud, and I'm also on Apple Podcasts. Send me an email. Tell me what you like. Tell me what you don't like. Tell me what I can improve on, or what you'd like to see at theboxcutter@gmail.com. It takes a village to raise something beautiful. In the words of Tony and Vivian, so long, farewell, until we meet again.
I play it really slow. A box beat. Now fast as you can go.